President Tolbert
Yeah.
and the Sawyer For Mayor campaign. That was a very significant event in the history of our elections. Here we had a popular university professor taking on the establishment. But you were involved with the Sawyer For Mayor campaign, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and tell us about the circumstances at the time, what was happening in the country, and how significant was Professor Sawyer's run?
I think the Sawyer For Mayor campaign was one of the most important elections in the history of the country. It
How
sounds
so?
strange. It sounds strange to say that because Sawyer never was elected to the position, but the election precipitated a lot of important changes. Too often, people think about the events, not the process that leads to those outcomes. You ask many Liberians, they will say, "Oh, it's a coup that brought multi-party elections." You follow? The reality is that actually, during the Talbot years, the Sawyer For Mayor campaign was part of a process of democratization, and there were opposition parties that were being registered. So that process was actually curtailed when the coup took place. And the PRC banned, the People's Redemption Council banned political activities by everyone for a while. But I would say that the elections were important, and I would like to explain why. When President Talbot came to power, he indicated that he wanted an administration very different from his predecessor. He would be tolerant of free speech, etc. And so in 1970, all of the media were owned by the government, controlled by the government, or the True Whig Party. Period. That's how far things had gone. Back in the 1800s, the government controlled none of the media. All of the newspapers were owned privately, all the way coming up to, the 1940s. And very quickly, we moved in a direction where the government not only took control of newspapers, but it then established the radio station, TV stations, etc., that it controlled. Okay. So when Talbot came and said he's liberalizing things, some friends and I who were freshmen in college, we had gone to different high schools. We got together and started a periodical called The Revelation. And that was the first non-government publication or media in Liberia, for decades. A New York Times reporter came, he wrote about this little publication that he said was so significant for that reason. There was a Liberian journalist working at City Hall as a press officer, Keith Best. He's Kenneth's brother.
Okay.
Kenneth owns the Observer. And Keith was working at the City Hall. And he was a student at the university at the time. I was teaching at the University of Liberia. Sawyer was there as well. He was in political science. And so Best came, and talking to friends and talking to people in his classes, he said, I work at City Hall, and there's about to be elections again. It's very likely that the True Whig Party candidate, Mayor David, is going to prevail. It's like a fait accompli, unless there can be a challenge.
So, sorry to interrupt you just briefly, Doc, because the candidate that I was aware of that Sawyer ran up against was Chuchu Horton. This was before Chuchu Horton, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So Mayor David was the incumbent. And when Best began talking about what was coming up, and what about the possibility that a candidate could run to challenge Mayor David? Is it legal for there to be an independent candidate, or does one have to be aligned with a political party? If a party is required, it will take a lot of resources, it will take some time. If an independent can run, then that could be done very quickly. So a very popular judge, Emma Walser, she was a Shannon, her maiden name was Shannon. Her father was a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah.
And she was approached and she declined to be the candidate, the independent candidate. And that was when Sawyer said, well, you know what? In that case, then he'll be willing to do it. So the reason I say the election was significant because when the campaign got underway, there were members of the True Whig Party, younger men. I say younger, in their 30s or thereabouts, 40s, who went to the party leaders and said, the party needs to change. The president says he wants to liberalize things, to open things up. And so we need to have primaries. And the primary was held, and Choo Choo Horton defeated David and the other people who ran against him. So that was one significant change right there. The elections were progressing, and Richard Henry, who was Speaker of the House, announced that he doesn't understand why people are getting so excited, thinking that they will all be able to vote because the law requiring property was still on the books. At that point, President Talbot called Sawyer and asked if he'd be willing to allow the government to postpone the election for mayor until the law could be changed.
To accommodate everybody.
To accommodate everybody. And Sawyer agreed. So what the elections taught me and taught many of us who were, present during that period is that the True Party was not homogeneous. People tend to talk about a party as if everybody was of the same mind. Talbot was doing one set of things, but there were one could call the old guard, Richard Henry and others who went back to Tubman's time, who had a different vision. And that clash of visions, came out in the context of the election. The elections were never held because it was during that period of postponement when the coup took place.